"Sign everything or get out," my son said at dinner. Just 1 week after we buried my husband. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The way he looked at me, cold, distant, like I was a stranger sitting at his table. My daughter-in-law didn't say a word. She just sat there, quietly cutting her steak, the corners of her lips lifting ever so slightly, like this moment had been rehearsed. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply nodded, and stood up from the table. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches." The dining room felt different that night, too quiet, too large, too empty. It had only been 7 days since we laid my husband to rest, 7 days since I stood beside his grave, holding onto a silence that felt heavier than grief itself. For 34 years, that man had been my anchor, the one who handled every storm before it ever reached me, the one who would have never allowed anyone, especially our own son, to speak to me that way. And now, he was gone. The chair at the head of the table was still there, untouched. I kept glancing at it, almost expecting him to walk back in, loosen his tie, and ask what was for dinner, like he always did. But the chair remained empty, just like everything else in that house now. "Pass the salt," my daughter-in-law said, without even looking at me. Her tone wasn't rude, it was worse than that. It was indifferent. I reached for the salt shaker, my hands steady despite the weight pressing against my chest. Across from me, my son avoided my eyes. He focused on his plate, chewing slowly, like this was just another ordinary dinner. This was the same boy who used to cling to my hand when crossing the street, the same boy who once told me I was the only person he could never live without. Now, he couldn't even look at me. "The house is too big for you," my daughter-in-law continued casually. "You won't be able to manage it on your own." I said nothing. She placed her fork down carefully, like she was about to present a business proposal. "We've been thinking," she added, glancing briefly at my son, "and honestly, it just makes sense for you to move somewhere smaller. More suitable." "Suitable," I repeated quietly. My son finally spoke, his voice low. "Mom, it's just practical." Practical. That word echoed in my mind longer than it should have. I looked around the room at the walls we painted together, at the chandelier we saved for months to afford, at the table where birthdays were celebrated, where laughter once filled every corner. And suddenly, none of it felt like mine anymore. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Sign everything or get out." He said it calmly, like he was asking me to pass the salt. And in that moment, I realized something I had refused to see for a very long time. I was no longer a mother in this house. I was a problem. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not emptier. Just unfamiliar. I stood in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The sunlight came through the same window it always had, falling across the counter in that soft, golden way my husband used to love. He would sit right there, tapping his fingers against the mug, asking me about my plans for the day. Now the chair was pushed in perfectly still, untouched. It had been 8 days since we buried him, 8 days since I became something else in my own home. Not a wife, not even a mother. Just someone waiting to leave. Upstairs, I could hear footsteps, my son's voice, her voice. Low, quiet. Conversations that used to include me now happened behind closed doors. I didn't go up. Instead, I opened the drawer where we kept the house documents. Everything was still there, neatly organized. Just the way my husband liked it. He had always been careful with details, always said it mattered to keep things clear. Just in case. Back then, I thought he meant paperwork. Now, I wasn't so sure. I ran my fingers over the folders, not opening them yet, just feeling the edges, as if the answers might rise up through paper. The sound of heels clicking on the stairs pulled me back. My daughter-in-law walked into the kitchen like she owned it, not loudly, not aggressively, just comfortably, like she had already decided where everything and everyone belonged. "You're up early," she said, reaching past me to grab a glass. "I didn't sleep much," I replied. She nodded, but not in sympathy, more like confirmation. "That makes sense," she said. "A lot is changing. A lot is changing." I repeated those words in my head, slowly. Not, "we're going through something." Not, "this is hard." Just change. Like I was furniture being moved from one room to another. My son came in a moment later, still in his work shirt. Sleeves rolled halfway up. He glanced at me just for a second. "Morning," he said. That was it. No mention of last night, no hesitation. Just, "Morning." I nodded. For a long moment, the three of us stood in the same kitchen, and somehow, I had never felt more alone. I spoke to a realtor. My daughter-in-law said suddenly, casual, direct. My son didn't react. "They can come by this week. Just to evaluate the property." The property. Not the house. Not my home. The property. I set my cup down carefully. "Already?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "Well, if we're being practical, there's no reason to wait." Practical. That word again. My son cleared his throat. "It's just timing, Mom," he said. "The market's good right now." I looked at him, then really looked. At the man who once cried when he lost his first tooth, at the boy who used to run to me after every bad dream. And for a moment, I searched for him. But he wasn't there anymore. In his place stood someone else, someone who spoke in numbers and timing and convenience. Not in love. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him whose hands built this life. Instead, I just nodded. Because somewhere, beneath the grief, beneath the silence, something else had begun to form. A quiet understanding. If they were already making plans for my future, then it was time I understood my past. By the third day, I started noticing things I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Not big things, not obvious ones. Just small changes. The kind that slip into a home quietly, like they've always been there. My closet felt lighter. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Grief does that. It blurs the edges of memory. Makes you question what's real. But when I reached for my blue coat, the one my husband bought me on our anniversary, it wasn't there. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the hanger. Empty. I didn't ask. Instead, I checked the drawers. Neatly folded clothes were gone. Not all of them, just enough to make space. As if someone was preparing the room for someone else. Downstairs, I found 2 boxes by the front door. Plain, brown, sealed halfway. No label. I didn't need one. I knew they were mine. I walked past them without touching a thing. In the living room, the furniture had been moved slightly, not enough for a stranger to notice. But I noticed. The chair my husband used to sit in had been pushed closer to the wall. The side table, where he kept his glasses, was gone entirely. Replaced with a decorative plant. Something modern, something impersonal. I stood there longer than I should have. It wasn't just rearranging. It was erasing. Later that afternoon, I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway. "Yes, the master bedroom is already being cleared," she said. "His mother will be moving out soon." His mother. Not my name, not even she. Just a role. Temporary. Replaceable. I stayed still, listening. "The space has great potential," she continued. "We're thinking of opening it up. Maybe turning it into a nursery." A nursery. I closed my eyes for a moment. That room. That room was where I held my husband's hand the night before he passed, where I sat for hours after. Unable to move. And now, it was space. I stepped away quietly before she could see me. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. A week ago, I could barely hold a spoon without feeling like I might break. Now, everything felt still. Too still. That evening, my son came home later than usual. He loosened his tie, walked straight into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. Routine. Normal. Like nothing had changed. "Did you see the boxes?" he asked, not looking at me. "I did," I said. "They're just to help you start organizing," he added. "Make things easier." Easier. I nodded slowly. "For who?" I asked. That made him pause. Just for a second. Then he shrugged. "For everyone. Everyone." I looked at him again. Really looked. And this time, I didn't search for the boy he used to be. Because I already knew he was gone. Replaced by someone who could pack up his mother's life into boxes. And call it convenience. I turned back to the sink. The water kept running, steady and quiet. Just like everything else in that house. But inside me, something was beginning to shift. That night, I didn't go upstairs right away. I stayed in the living room, sitting in the chair they hadn't moved yet. The only one they hadn't touched. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind that makes you hear things you tried to forget. I looked around slowly. Every corner of that room held something, not objects. Memories. My husband used to sit across from me, right by the window every evening. Same time. He'd loosen his tie, lean back, and ask, "How was your day?" Not because anything interesting ever happened, but because he cared. I let out a slow breath. For over 30 years, we built that house together, not all at once. Piece by piece. There was a time we couldn't even afford proper curtains. We used old sheets. Cut and pinned, just to keep the sunlight out. He used to joke about it, said one day, we'd have a home so beautiful, we wouldn't recognize it anymore. And he was right. But not in the way he meant. I stood up and walked toward the hallway. My hand brushed against the wall, stopping at a small mark near the corner. Faint, almost gone. But I remembered exactly what it was. That was where our son used to stand every year on his birthday. We'd measure his height. Draw a small line, write the date beside it. He used to laugh, standing on his toes, trying to look taller. Stay still, I would tell him, you're growing fast enough already. I smiled, just for a second. Then it faded. Because that boy would have never said, sign everything or get out. I walked into the bedroom slowly. The bed was still made the way I left it that morning, his side untouched. His pillow still slightly indented. I sat down, my hand resting where his used to be. He always handled everything, bills, documents, decisions. Not because I couldn't, but because he said, you've done enough. Let me take care of this. At the time, it felt like love. Now, it felt like something else. Like he had been preparing for something I didn't understand. I reached over and opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside were old letters, receipts. A few documents I never paid attention to. My name was on some of them. I traced the signature slowly. Mine. But I didn't remember signing half of it. Back then, I never asked questions. If he said it was routine, I believed him. I trusted him completely. And now, standing in that quiet room, surrounded by everything we built together, I started to wonder, what exactly had he been protecting me from? Downstairs, I heard a door close, then silence again. I didn't move. Because for the first time since that dinner, I wasn't just remembering the past anymore. I was starting to question it. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No one asked. The air outside felt colder than it should have for that time of year. Or maybe it was just me. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly to the car. For a moment, I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel. I hadn't driven alone in a long time. My husband always preferred to drive. Said it gave him something to focus on. Said it kept his mind sharp. I used to sit beside him, watching the road pass by, never thinking I'd have to do any of this on my own. But now, there was no one else. The bank was only 15 minutes away. I had been there countless times before, but always with him. This was the first time I walked in alone. The glass doors slid open, and the familiar scent of polished floors and quiet voices greeted me. Everything looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. "Good morning," the receptionist said gently. "Can I help you?" I hesitated, just for a second. Then I nodded. "I need to review my accounts." She smiled politely and guided me to a desk near the back. A woman in her 50s introduced herself. Calm voice, careful eyes. I sat down across from her, placing my purse on my lap like it might steady me. "My husband handled all our finances," I said. "He passed away last week." Her expression softened immediately. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said. I nodded. "I just need to understand what's in my name." She turned to her computer, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. For a moment, there was only the sound of typing. Then, she paused. Just slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in concentration. "Mrs. Carter," she said slowly, "when was the last time you reviewed your full financial profile?" I frowned. "I haven't," I admitted. "My husband took care of everything." She nodded again, but this time, there was something different in her expression. Something unexpected. "Well," she said carefully, "it looks like there are several accounts here that we should go through together." Several. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the edge of my purse. "What kind of accounts?" I asked. She turned the monitor slightly, angling it toward me. "There's your joint checking account," she said, pointing. "That's what you've been using for daily expenses." I nodded. That part one understood. "But there are also," she paused, clicking again, "additional savings accounts, certificates, and—" her voice trailed off for just a moment. "And a trust account." I blinked. "A trust?" She looked back at me. "Yes, established several years ago." "Several years." I shook my head slowly. "That doesn't sound right." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. "Your name is listed as the primary holder," she said gently. Primary. The word didn't make sense at first. I leaned forward slightly. "I've never opened anything like that," I said. She slid a document across the desk. "Your signature is here," she replied. I looked down. There it was. My name, my handwriting. Dated, years ago. I stared at it longer than I should have. Trying to remember. Trying to understand. But nothing came. Just a quiet realization. That maybe. There were things my husband never told me. And maybe. He had a reason. I didn't speak for a while after that. I just stared at the paper in front of me. My name, written clearly, dated years ago. Real. But unfamiliar. When would I have signed this? I asked quietly. The woman across from me didn't rush to answer. "Sometimes," she said gently, "clients bring their spouses in to sign documents as part of routine updates. It may not have been explained in detail at the time." Routine. That word again. So many things had been routine. I leaned back slightly in the chair. Memories started to surface, not clearly, just pieces. Trips to the bank with my husband, papers placed in front of me, his voice. Calm as always. "Just sign here." And I did. Every time. Without reading, without asking. Because I trusted him. Completely. I looked back at the screen. "How much is in these accounts?" I asked. She clicked again. Numbers appeared. At first, they didn't mean anything. Then slowly, they began to settle into place. And when they did, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not fear. Not confusion. Something else. "These are all under your control," she said carefully, "as the primary holder. You have full access." Full access. I repeated it in my head. All this time, I thought I had nothing. I thought everything belonged to my husband, and now, to my son. But that wasn't true. Not entirely. "There's more," she added, almost cautiously. She opened another file. "This trust account, it's been receiving regular transfers." "From where?" I asked. She glanced at the screen again. "A business account, your husband's company, I believe." I froze. "He sold that company years ago," I said. "That's what I was told." She hesitated. "According to these records, the account is still active." Active. The word echoed in my mind. My son had said there was nothing left, that the business had barely covered debts. That there was no real inheritance to speak of. I sat there, very still. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded. "There have been consistent deposits. And transfers into this trust, under your name." Under my name. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. Strangely steady. As if they already understood something my mind was just beginning to catch up to. For years, my husband had been handling everything, quietly, carefully. And now, it was starting to feel like that wasn't just habit. It was intention. "Mrs. Carter," the woman said gently, "I would recommend speaking with an attorney who can review this with you in detail." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. But my voice sounded different now. Quieter. Stronger. Because somewhere between the confusion and the numbers, between the signatures I didn't remember and the accounts I didn't know existed, a realization had begun to take shape. My husband hadn't left me unprotected. He had just hidden it well. I didn't go straight home after leaving the bank. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot, the engine off, the documents resting on my lap. The numbers were still there, clear, undeniable. But it wasn't the money that stayed with me. It was the pattern. Every transfer, every account. Quiet, consistent, intentional. I thought about the last few years. The times my son would come by, talking about expenses the way my daughter-in-law would hint about tight months, about how difficult things had become for them. And every time, my husband would listen, nod, say very little. Then, a few days later, he would disappear for an hour or two. Just handling some things, he would tell me. I never questioned it. Why would I? He always came back calm, certain. Like everything was exactly where it needed to be. Now, sitting there in that quiet car, I started to understand. He had been helping them. But not the way they thought. I picked up one of the statements again. The dates lined up too perfectly. Every time our son asked for help, money moved. But not just to him. To me. To the accounts under my name. Balanced. Measured. As if he was giving. And protecting at the same time. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for just a moment. He knew. Not everything. But enough. Enough to prepare. Enough to make sure that no matter what happened, I wouldn't be left with nothing. A car passed by slowly, the sound pulling me back. I opened my eyes again. The world outside looked the same. But something inside me had shifted. For days, I had been reacting. To their words, to their plans, to the quiet way they were removing me from my own life. But now, I had something they didn't expect. Information. And more importantly, time. They thought I was still grieving, still confused, still dependent. They thought I would pack my things, sign whatever they placed in front of me, and leave quietly. I folded the documents carefully and placed them back into my purse. Then I started the engine. This time, I knew exactly where I was going next. Not home. Not yet. If my husband had taken the time to build something this carefully, then I owed it to him. To understand all of it. And to make sure it stayed exactly where he intended. I didn't return home until late afternoon. Long enough for the house to feel different again. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the tension. Subtle but there. Like something had already started, without me. My daughter-in-law was in the living room, pacing slowly with her phone in hand. She stopped the moment she saw me. For a split second, her expression shifted. Not concern. Not relief. Something closer to calculation. "You were out," she said. Not a question. A statement. "I had things to take care of," I replied. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on my purse. As if she was trying to guess what I knew. Or what I didn't. My son came down the stairs a moment later. Faster than usual. "Mom," he said, a little too quickly. "Where did you go?" There it was. Not worry. Timing. I looked at him calmly. "Just out," I said. He held my gaze for a second, then looked away. That was new. He used to avoid my eyes because he didn't want to face me. Now, it felt like he didn't want me to read him. Dinner that night was quieter than before. But not empty. Tight. Every word measured. Every silence heavier. Halfway through the meal, my son cleared his throat. "So, we've been thinking," he said. Again. That phrase again. I didn't respond. I just waited. "It might be easier if we handled the paperwork together," he continued. "Less stress for you." Less stress. My daughter-in-law nodded slightly beside him. "Yes," she added, her voice softer now. "We can call someone to come over. Make everything official." Official. I took a slow sip of water. Set the glass down carefully. "And what exactly needs to be official?" I asked. They exchanged a quick glance. "Barely noticeable." But I saw it. The house, my son said, and some other assets. Some other assets. The way he said it. Like he didn't know exactly what those assets were. That told me everything I needed to know. They were moving fast. Too fast. Trying to secure something. Before they understood what they were dealing with. I see, I said quietly. No argument, no hesitation. Just 2 words. That seemed to confuse them more than anything else. My daughter-in-law leaned forward slightly. So, you agree? She asked. I met her eyes for the first time that day. Calm. Steady. I didn't say that, I replied. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. My son shifted in his chair. Mom, we're just trying to help, he said. Help. That word almost made me smile. Almost. I stood up slowly from the table. I'm tired, I said. And I left the room before either of them could respond. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there. Listening. The muffled sound of their voices downstairs, lower, now more urgent. They were talking. About me. About the situation. About what to do next. And for the first time, I wasn't the one trying to understand them. They were the ones trying to understand what I knew. I walked over to the nightstand and opened the drawer again. The documents were still there. Neat, organized. Waiting. I didn't touch them this time. I didn't need to. Because now, I understood something they didn't. They thought they were in control. They thought they were planning my exit. But they had already stepped into something they couldn't see yet. The next morning, I didn't wait for them to bring it up again. I came downstairs early before either of them had finished their coffee. They both looked up when I walked into the kitchen. Surprised. That hadn't happened in a while. I think we should talk, I said. My voice was calm, even. My son straightened slightly in his chair. My daughter-in-law set her cup down a little too quickly. About the paperwork, I added. That got their attention. Of course, she said, almost immediately, we've actually been looking into. I know, I said, cutting in gently. Not sharp, not aggressive. Just enough to stop her. Silence followed. I walked over to the table and placed my purse down beside me. Then I sat. Slowly. Carefully. I went to the bank yesterday, I said. That was all it took. The air shifted. My son's expression changed first just slightly. Then hers. A flicker. Quick, but there. What for? He asked. Too casually. I looked at him. For the accounts, I replied. No more, no less. He nodded, but I could see it now, the uncertainty. The gap between what he thought he knew and what he didn't. There's no need for you to worry about that, my daughter-in-law said. Her tone softer now. We can handle everything together. Together. I folded my hands in front of me. I think I've handled enough already, I said. Quiet. But firm. Another silence. This one longer. My son leaned forward slightly. Mom, what exactly did they tell you? There it was. Not concern. Not support. Information. He wanted to know how much I knew. I let the question sit for a moment. Then I reached into my purse and took out a single paper. Not everything. Just one. I placed it on the table between us. Neither of them touched it at first. They just looked at it. Then at each other. Then back at me. It seems, I said slowly, that there are things in this family that weren't explained properly. My daughter-in-law picked up the paper first. Her eyes moved quickly across the page. Then stopped. Just for a second. That was enough. She passed it to my son. His reaction was slower. He read more carefully. Line by line. His jaw tightened slightly. What is this? He asked. I met his eyes. Something your father prepared, I said. And something you didn't know about. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the walls had moved in just a little. That doesn't change anything, my daughter-in-law said quickly. We're still talking about the house. The assets. The assets, I repeated softly. I shook my head once. I don't think you understand what you're talking about. That landed. Not loudly. But clearly. My son looked between us. Confused. Frustrated. "Mom, if there's something we need to discuss, just say it," he said. I stood up slowly. "I will," I replied. "But not like this." I picked up the paper from the table and placed it back into my purse. Then I looked at him one more time. Not at the man he had become, but at the choice he had made. "You asked me to sign everything," I said quietly. "I think it's time you understand what everything actually is." And with that, I walked out of the room. I didn't speak to them for the rest of that day. There was nothing left to say, not yet. Some things needed space, not for emotion, but for understanding. The house was quiet again that evening, but this time, it felt different. Not empty. Waiting. I stayed upstairs, going through the documents one by one. Slowly. Carefully. Every page revealed something I hadn't known, every line, something my husband had arranged long before any of this happened. The trust account wasn't simple. It wasn't just savings. It was structured, layered, protected. There were conditions, names, clauses I didn't fully understand at first. But one thing became very clear. Control didn't pass automatically. Not to my son, not to anyone. It stayed with me. I closed the folder gently and sat back in the chair. For years, I had believed I was being taken care of. Now I realized I had been trusted. Trusted to decide. Trusted to protect what we built. Even if I didn't know it at the time. Downstairs, I heard voices again. Lower. Tighter. They weren't trying to hide it anymore. They were worried. I walked to the door and opened it quietly. Just enough to hear. "That doesn't make sense," my son was saying. "There's no way he would have done that without telling me." "He didn't tell you a lot of things," my daughter-in-law replied. Her voice was sharper now. "You said everything was straightforward." "That's what I was told," he said. "Told? By who?" I stepped back and closed the door. There was no need to listen further. They were starting to realize something important. They didn't understand the situation. Not fully. And that uncertainty was making them careless. The next morning, they were different. More polite. More careful with their words. My daughter-in-law even asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see how far they would go. My son watched me more closely now. Every movement, every word. As if trying to read something that wasn't there before. "We should finish the paperwork soon," he said eventually. His tone was softer now. Less certain. I looked at him. For a long moment. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said. "We should." Relief flickered across his face. Too quickly. He thought I had agreed. That I had given in. That everything would go back to the plan they had already made. I picked up my cup and took a slow sip. Then I set it down. "I've already spoken to someone," I added. That stopped him. "Someone?" he repeated. "A lawyer," I said. The word settled heavily between us. My daughter-in-law's hand tightened slightly around her cup. My son didn't speak. Not right away. Because now, they understood something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I stood up from the table. "I think it's best we all sit down together," I said calmly, with everything on the table. No anger, no accusation. Just a statement. And for the first time since that night at dinner, they didn't argue. They didn't push back. They just nodded. Because somewhere, deep down, they were beginning to realize the truth. This wasn't going to be simple anymore. And I wasn't going to leave quietly. The meeting was set for Friday morning. 10 a.m. My son chose the time, my daughter-in-law chose the lawyer. But I chose something else. Silence. I didn't argue about any of it, I didn't suggest changes. I just agreed. Because by then, I understood something they didn't. This wasn't their meeting. It was mine. Friday came quietly. The house felt staged. Too clean, too prepared. Like they were trying to control something that had already slipped out of their hands. My daughter-in-law was dressed neatly. Papers organized in front of her like she was ready to present a case. My son sat beside her. Shoulders slightly tense, jaw tight. He didn't look at me when I walked in. The lawyer arrived a few minutes later. Young, polite, confident in the way people are when they believe they understand the situation. "Mrs. Carter," he said, offering his hand. "I understand we're here to discuss the transfer of property." Transfer. Such a simple word. I nodded once and took my seat. "Yes," I said. "That's what I've been told." My daughter-in-law smiled slightly, relieved. She slid a folder across the table. "These are the documents," she said. "We've already reviewed everything." Of course they had. I didn't open the folder. Instead, I placed my own on the table. Slowly. Carefully. The sound of it landing was quiet. But it changed the room. "What's that?" my son asked. "Something your father prepared," I replied. I opened it. Turned the pages one by one. Not rushing. Not explaining yet. Just letting them see. Numbers. Names. Clauses. Things they didn't recognize. The young lawyer leaned forward slightly. His confidence shifted. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "I didn't get them," I said. "I've had them." That wasn't entirely true. But it didn't matter. What mattered was what they meant. "This trust," I continued, "is under my name." Silence. My son looked at the documents again. Slower this time. More carefully. "And according to this," I added, "nothing can be transferred without my full consent." My daughter-in-law's expression changed. Not dramatically. But enough. "That doesn't affect the house," she said quickly. "The house is still included," I said. Calm. Clear. Final. The lawyer straightened in his seat. "Ma'am, if this is accurate," he began. "It is," I said. No hesitation. No doubt. Because I had already confirmed it. Twice. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the air itself had shifted. My son leaned back slowly. His eyes moved between me and the papers. Trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. But nothing had gone wrong. Not really. He just never knew the whole story. "You asked me to sign everything," I said quietly. I folded my hands on the table. And I was willing to listen. I paused. Just long enough for them to feel it. But now, I looked at both of them. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just clarity. "I think it's time we discuss what actually belongs to me." No one spoke after that. Because for the first time, they understood. This wasn't a formality. It was a line. And they had already crossed it. No one raised their voice that day. No one argued. The meeting ended the same way it had unfolded, quietly. But nothing about it was the same anymore. In the days that followed, the house changed again. Not physically. But in the way people moved inside it. My son spoke less careful now, measured. My daughter-in-law stayed polite, too polite. The kind of politeness that comes when someone realizes they've misjudged the situation. I didn't confront them again. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. A week later, I packed my things. Not because they told me to. Not because I had to. But because I chose to. There's a difference. I folded each piece of clothing slowly, took only what I needed. Left the rest behind. Not out of anger. But because I no longer felt tied to any of it. The house. It wasn't the walls that made it mine. It was the life we built inside it. And that, no one could take from me. On the morning I left, my son stood by the door. He looked like he wanted to say something. Several times, he opened his mouth. Then closed it again. "I didn't know," he finally said. His voice was low. Almost careful. I looked at him for a long moment. At the man he had become. At the boy I once knew. "I believe you," I said. And I did. That was the hardest part. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't built the trap. He had simply followed it. Step by step. Until there was no space left for me. My daughter-in-law stood further back. Silent. Watching. Waiting. But I didn't look at her. There was nothing left to say. Some things don't need words. I picked up my bag and stepped outside. The air felt different. Not lighter. Not easier. Just mine. For the first time in a long while. I moved into a smaller place not far from the city. Quiet. Simple. Enough space for what I needed. And nothing more. The accounts were secured, the trust remained untouched. Everything stayed exactly where it was meant to be. Just like he planned. Sometimes, I still think about that dinner. The words, "Sign everything or get out." They don't hurt the way they used to. Not anymore. Because now, I understand something I didn't then. They thought they were taking everything from me. But they were only showing me what was never truly mine to begin with. Family is not defined by who sits at your table. Or who shares your name. It's defined by who stands beside you. When it matters. I lost a husband. And in a way, I lost a son too. But I didn't lose myself. And in the end, that was the only thing worth keeping.